Welcome, everybody. Thank you for coming to hang out with our community today. This webinar is part of our series, which is open to members and friends. About 6 weeks ago, 5-6 weeks ago, we had Carol Murchison speak with us on the theme Preventing Sexual Misconduct in Spiritual Communities. And whether you were there at that event or not, you can look at the recording on YouTube or on the past events part of our website if you want to see the legal advice and the practicalities of Carol Murchison's first-hand experience of dealing with the legalities of sexual abuse in spiritual communities. And so following on from that, it made sense to bring it home into the ASI, into our own team here, to see, well, what is it within our code of ethics that addresses sexual boundaries, sexual misconduct. It's a topic that that was very tricky. When we started to draw up the code of ethics, we got advice from a plethora of people, and it ranged from do not touch sexual behavior at all in our code of ethics, right through to have very strict guidelines around. I remember one person being very strong, saying, for good reason, saying there should be a minimum of 2 years of a gap of a period between when there's a teacher and a student and when they move into being in a relationship, a 2-year gap. And that's great in theory. However, when the chemistry is there and something is happening and you're talking to each other about it, the 2 years really becomes very theoretical and is rarely adhered to. So from strict guidelines to let's not touch it at all, we eventually found wording for 2 tenets, which some of you may have been involved with because we did community consultation with this on our code of ethics as it was developed. So this is our first chance to review this this topic in a community setting. And so we would like to hear from you. Is it realistic? Is the wording appropriate? Does it speak to you? Is there some insight that you would have that would help us how to dive deeper into something? Have we missed some nuances? Should these tenets be there? Are they too loose? Are they too tight? What's your opinion? And that's what we would love to hear. We will have group conversations and we will have breakout rooms to really see, well, what do you feel? What's your honest opinion? And we want to hear, because this is a member-led organization. And as much as we can, we want to revert to community consultation so that it's a we who's making these decisions, so that the support systems that we put in place in the Honor Code of Ethics is appropriate for all of us, and not in a top-down model, but in a way that we are creating guidelines that support us as spiritual leaders. And so we asked Kimberly, or else Kimberly volunteered, I'm not sure, when this topic came up at a board meeting, Kimberly kindly volunteered to facilitate this meeting for us. So with that background, I'm going to hand you over to Kimberly.
Okay, thank you, Jack. Hi, everybody. Welcome. Great to see your shining faces back at you. And I also want to welcome those of you who will be listening to this in the future. We call you in and include this in this circle as well. So I invite you to be here now, right, as the famous saying goes, for this next 90 minutes, in your presence, in your attunement, in your curiosity and vulnerability. Know that this is a container that is, held for spiritual leaders in whatever form that is, and also the spiritual seekers in all of us. We were so fortunate to have Carol Murchison lead a perspective on sexual abuse in spiritual communities from really the modernistic legal viewpoint, which we must include if our spirituality and religious practices, teachings, traditions are going to survive in this modern day. I'll pick up from where she left off. So I do encourage you, if you were not there or you have not had a chance to listen to Carol's conversation with the community and presentation, then please do that. That talk is available for free on the ASI website. So Jack mentioned these two tenets we have in our code of ethics. And I really come from, I'm here with you as a fellow spiritual leader, as a fellow spiritual aspirant. I really come from that perspective. So today, my intention and our intention, wish and hope is to really, talk big picture about what is the right use of power around sexual ethics. How can we apply these tenets more specifically in our principles, both as principles we hold and rules we hold both as individuals and as organizations, since many of us in our community are embedded in an organization of some sort, right? So we're coming at it from that angle. I'll speak just for a few more minutes and set a frame for us and some context for us. And then we'll go into breakout groups so that we can really stir the pot and have some intimate conversations. And then we'll come back for open space community conversation once again. Okay, so that's what today's going to look like. So we at ASI have developed these ethical tenets, these principles, right? Think like a frame of how we're going to commit ourselves and hold ourselves as spiritual individuals and as spiritual organizations. Number 17, and maybe I can ask Renata or somebody who feels typey to type this into the chat box for us. Number 17, never abusing the trust of students to obtain sexual gratification, money, free labor, or other personal benefits. Okay. Never abusing the trust to get something. And number 18, being particularly mindful of sexual boundaries with students and honoring them at all times. So these are well and good. They're very important. How do we do them? Right? What have we learned in the past 20, 30, 40, 50 years, especially in our postmodern era, of integrating these traditions, these old traditions, which have very different rules and different ways of approaching sexuality? How do we integrate them into our modern life? Where have we fallen off and where have we succeeded? Now, one of the things that we learned from Carol is the importance of including that legal perspective, that modern perspective. One of the key learnings from that we learned was that individuals and organizations have a responsibility to assume what's called duty of care, right? Now, legally, this means that if you are an individual or within an organization and there is abuse of some sort, and there's a difference between abuse and misuse, right, of sexual power, which is something we've learned and talk about a lot. But there is a behavior, something that happened that is abusive. Organizations and boards of directors can actually be sued in many states, not all states, for being responsible for the individuals in their organization. So there is a responsibility that organizations have to assume, to not look the other way, to be careful and aware and open and conscious about what's happening within the dynamics of what is often a student-teacher relationship. Carol also recommended that we establish and publish principles of what we do when and if there is, as Jack says, a relationship. And it could be a relationship that is not chronic, not abuse, just love. Love happens, right? Love happens between people. And many times teachers are in a position where the people they meet are those in a spiritual community. So what do we do with that? How do we make that conscious and right? Carol said, establish principles. If you're an individual teacher, if you're an organization, if you're a student, ask for the principles. Make sure there are house rules and guidelines for how one is going to engage. Now, what Carol didn't get into was specifics. Okay, and I'm going to come back after a little bit and share some best practices we've seen. Jack mentioned a couple of them about what these principles can look like. But number one is have principles, have house rules that are clear, open, communicated. One thing that I would add in my own 25 years of being on all sides of this topic, I can share individually and organizationally is, how do we uphold these tenets? Have a feedback process for the teacher, for the minister, for the clergy, whether you're alternative, whether you're non-alternative, ensure, and as a student, if you're a student listening to this, ask for this. Ensure that there is a feedback process in place that is actually real and that it's baked, built and baked into the culture. Now, this might be more challenging in traditional systems and clergies that are resistant to change, have a culture where change is not okay. That's a system that's not going to survive in this modern day and where it's going to get stinky. If a greenhouse doesn't get air in it, doesn't get feedback in it, what happens? It gets pretty darn stinky, right? So watch for the stinky is like principle number 3, but ensure that there is a feedback process. And built on that, I think this is, if I was going to stake a claim and put a wish out there, is that it's so necessary that we have a culture, and may this meeting and gathering together be a prayer for that we have a culture in our spiritual and religious communities where it's okay for the teacher to be fallible, right? It's okay to make mistakes. It's okay to admit when they've done something wrong, because that necessity, that's necessary for a feedback process to be healthy and whole, right? To acknowledge, I'm a spiritual leader. I have misused power in the past, and I'm seeing it, and I'm admitting it, and I'm getting the feedback. So, I'm admitting my imperfection so I may be more perfect. We must have both of these. In order to have both of these, so that requires not only a feedback process, like, send in your anonymous form, perhaps. I think there are more sophisticated ways to do feedback process. But teachers are fallible. They're human. They're going to have shadow, which leads to another principle. Spiritual teachers, and I kindly and lovingly call on all of us to examine this in our own heart, those who are spiritual teachers. I always tell students, never take a spiritual teacher unless they have a therapist, unless they are getting help themselves, unless they have a shadow practice. They don't need to make their shadow practice transparent to everybody, but they need to have a shadow practice and a peer support group. Everybody should have somebody they report to, whether it be a board, because we are also human. Just like as we are imperfect, we are perfect. As we are divine, we are human. This is the embodiment that we have. And there are parts of every single one of us, no matter how awake we may be, that is not yet grown up. We have to grow up as well as wake up. And so as teachers, again, you don't have to air all your dirty laundry, right? We can hold our seat as our empowered seat and something we've been trained to do, while at the same time off the cushion, so to speak, doing our work. And those things are not inconsistent with each other. So that's part of this culture that we're working to change. And yeah, I think that's enough to chew on for now. So we're going to put you into breakout groups. Perfect, 15 minutes. I would like you to reflect on perhaps what arose for you in what I shared about principles, why you are here. What is arising for you around this topic of feedback for teachers, principles we can uphold around sexual relationships and within the student-teacher relationship, maybe best practices you may know, because we're going to come back and we're going to take a look at what do best practices really look like, and we want to make sure and get your wisdom for that. So Renata, 15 minutes. You're going to have 5 minutes each, groups of 3 primarily. Please manage your time. And then also I invite a little part of your self-awareness to take note of any themes or patterns you notice that you can bring back to the group so we can really mine the learnings together. Okay. Let's go. Welcome back. I hope that was fruitful for you. Yeah? Yeah, give me some physical. Was it good? Was it good? Give me some ups. Okay, thank you. Oh, that feels good. Yeah, I always love that. So let's mine the gems, mine the jewels. You can raise your hand. You can send me a private message in the chat box if you want to be anonymous with your share. Happy to do that. Brownie's Honor will not share your name. And if you're so inspired, just even unmute yourself and come on. Tell us what your reflections are on that session.
So I was in a group with one other person, and she can identify herself if she wants to, but she was talking about her whole history as a social worker running a rape clinic, or a place where girls can come if they've been raped to get counseling and help, and how common it was among college students, and then her own experience of having been assaulted numerous times, including by a Catholic priest. And this kind of story is so common. And my concluding point was that this is why we started the ASI, because not only this, but because this kind of misbehavior and other kinds are so prevalent in the larger spiritual community, and which is important to us. We feel that the spiritual endeavor is very important for individuals and society, but is being sabotaged or undermined by bad actors or people who aren't totally bad but have some flaws and haven't grown up as much as they may have woken up, and that it needs to be addressed. So anyway, that was kind of our conclusion.
Okay, Rick, you outed me. Hi, everyone. I'm Catherine McGinnis. Jack knows me, and we've been doing all of her courses, and signed up to a few of yours, Kimberly. Very, very interested in your take with Kim Wilber's Integral, which was a big piece about 3 or 4 years ago, that I saw that the growing up part was so important, right? And that if there's one word that encapsulates everything that you're doing here, would be, we don't have to talk about the waking up part. Sounds like everyone's done a lot of work on that. But the growing up part piece is still really missing, and I've been heavily involved with Rupert and Francis Lucille. And so I have really had those wonderful openings. Yet the growing up part, I see, until Jack kind of called it to my attention, wait a minute, I think you're spiritually bypassing here. I went, oh yeah, here we go. And then came into the whole grown up thing. What part have I not grown up? What parts of me still needs to be working on the growing up part? Now, as Rick said, have been a social worker. I'm now an interior designer. I gave up social work after 2 years of being a founder member of the Rape Crisis Center in Halifax. After 2 years, I thought, I'm not going to survive here. And the joke is that I told Rick I'm sitting in a bar after going to the police station, helping a lady that had been raped, a young girl, 18 years old, from Dalhousie University. But, afterwards, we got a priest on one side, I've got a police officer on the other side. We're sitting in a bar talking about what just went on for the last 4 hours at the hospitals, and the priest was there to counsel her, and the police officer was there to make sure the reports and the rape kits and all of that got done. And then they're just talking about their personal lives. And the police officer just shares that he wants to know if I'd like to smoke a joint with him because he just pulled over a guy and took his grass from him and didn't write up a ticket, and we could have some grass to smoke if we wanted to. This is the 80s, right? And the priest was telling me how he's having trouble with his 2 girlfriends. And I'm thinking, what universe am I living in? Like, where's the integrity? Where's the ethics in people's lives? And these are the people that we brought into our organization. We brought them in. Those are the police we chose. These are the priests we chose. So that really worries me still to this day about all the work you have to do to get those clean lines without being so, as you said, perfect, you know? Of course, we have to be vulnerable, and we have to understand that we made mistakes. And, you know, as Rick said, I've been sexually assaulted 3 times, and it was like, each time was like, how much of that was vulnerable and then, you know, as a 12-year-old with a priest, as an 18-year-old or 19-year-old as a rape, date rape, you know? These are things that happen to thousands and thousands and thousands of people. And the last one was a brutal rape where, you know, guns and knives, and how you survive, right? How do you do that? And each one was very different. And and I did do a lot of therapy, so I've done a lot of work. I congratulate myself because it was like, you're pretty smart on how to survive these things. But where is that in this story here? Where are people coming out and saying, I've been, you know, sexually assaulted by priests? Say, come on, like that happens all the time. It really does. It's very common. Or by grabbing by your uncle, or, you know, whatever, your, you know, family members or whatever, you know, like, where do we feel vulnerable and safe enough to bring this into the conversation and know that I don't want to spend the rest of my life talking about these 3 events in my life too. And that's why a lot of people don't want to do it, because they've moved on. So that's kind of what I have. It's kind of around the word growing up. Why aren't people actually speaking about this with their own personal experiences? What's stopping them? Okay.
Catherine, thank you so much for your share and honesty and vulnerability in it. And I can feel it as this awakening lightning bolt of what do we do? You know, what's in our culture, you know, that's blocking us from people from talking about it? What's in our system that gives us means, which really Carol was talking about, you know, about being the advocate for those who have been abused and representing them in court. Like in our modern legal system, there's that avenue. It's a modernistic view. But then there's the shadow issues of that policeman and that lawyer and that part of them, this little, I don't even want to start psychoanalyzing them from afar, but where, you know, we got to wake us all up, you know, and bring shadow into the conversation, shadow in our positions of power. It is a terrifying and heartbreaking how often this happens. And what are the other thoughts? There's a lot of experts in this room, and would love to hear from you. A lot of you here have experience and perspective in response to Catherine and otherwise. Yes, Jerry?
All right. Yeah. Several things come to mind. The first is, let me just read you the words of Shankara on the topic, talking explicitly about his own shadow, because we need references that will give permission to teachers to accept the reality that enlightenment doesn't automatically make somebody, you know, super beyond, human fallibility. Shankara said,
Briefly tell people who Shankara was, Jerry.
well, Shankara is the founder of Advaita Vedanta. And he's one of the, most important teachers in that whole tradition. He wrote the commentary on the Brahma Sutra, which is one of the core texts of that entire territory of teaching and philosophy. Many, many things he wrote. He wrote the Crest Jewel of Discrimination. He wrote many, many commentaries. He single-handedly is credited with the fact that India went back from being Buddhist to being more as it is now in the Sanatana Dharma tradition that we popularly call Hinduism. But he went throughout India and debated, and he was famous for convincing huge masses of people of the truth of Brahman and the truth of enlightenment and the truth that anyone can realize the highest states of consciousness. So in his own terminology, in the terminology of Vedanta, Shankara would have said, he is himself Brahman realized. He has himself attained the highest state of consciousness, which there'll be different names for it in different traditions. And he said about himself, in this ocean of worldly existence, which is endless, I am full of sorrow and very much afraid. I am full of sins, lustful, greedy, and intoxicated. I have always done bad deeds, been with bad people, held bad intentions, been a bad servant. I have always had bad thoughts, spoken bad words. During dispute and quarrel, despair and dejection, intoxication and insanity, you alone are my refuge, O Mother Bhavani, the divine mother goddess. That would be probably Green Tara in Buddhism. But he seems not to have put himself on a pedestal, and he was as powerfully and profoundly enlightened as any human being has ever lived on the face of the earth. So we have this example, and we can find others. Sri Aurobindo wrote, realization by itself does not necessarily transform the being as a whole. One may have some light of realization at the spiritual summit of consciousness, but the parts below remain what they were. And, you can go into other traditions. Thomas Merton wrote about the sinfulness of, true saints in the Christian tradition, or the humanity of them and the fact that they had human flaws and foibles. So number one is the project of re-educating the world to correct this image of enlightenment as some kind of perfection. Enlightenment is a kind of perfection, but it's a perfection that includes imperfection. And then, changing the archetype, number one, and number two, communicating in that process to as many teachers and spiritual leaders as we can get their attention. Hey, it's okay for you to be human, because my sense is, Shankara says it's okay. My sense is, and a lot of this is my own experience. I've felt terribly isolated for decades. And I have not been in the position very much of being a spiritual teacher, but the people who have a, clear 24/7, 365 vocation as a spiritual teacher, who are leaders and have a following and a large organization, those people I imagine often must feel terribly isolated and really
yeah.
stranded. So how do we communicate to them, hey, you can be part of a community of spiritual teachers and you can let your guard down. You can
Yes.
be human with each other. You can admit your flaws because it doesn't take you out of your authority as a teacher. You still have that authority. You have it even more so when
Yeah.
you rise to the level. You know, there's a phrase in that I heard many years ago. You know, Brahman, which is the name in that tradition for that highest reality. You know, Buddha mind might be another term for it, or Buddha nature. Brahman accepts everything and rejects nothing. Brahman includes everything and excludes nothing. It has to include negativity. It has to include the shadow. It has to include the inherent sinfulness of the human condition. So to accept that humanity on the part of a teacher who is living, presumably already, a very highly awakened experience, to allow that to include the shadow and the growing up and the cleaning up as part of that totality, as part of that enlightened reality. That's a higher enlightenment than the enlightenment sets itself apart and says, I am perfect. I am beyond human fallibility. No, that's a very, incomplete, unintegrated enlightenment. The true enlightenment is the one that says, I am the totality. I include everything. And everything includes the shadow. It includes the sinfulness. It includes all the problem solving, all of that.
Thank you. Sing it from the mountaintops.
Yeah, and I see ASI as a safe haven.
Thank you.
Just
Yeah.
have to get that message out to as many teachers as possible.
And everybody may it echo forever. One thing is to have a spiritual place to let your hair down, right? As Jerry said, that's what we're doing with peer circles at the ASI. And you don't necessarily have to do it for the ASI, but add it to that principle of, does the spiritual teacher, do the people I'm involved with, is there a place, a peer group, a therapist, a teacher, where they can receive support, be human, because being human also evolves. We can actually awaken, grow up our parts of ourselves. We can actually, because of spirituality, I believe, heal, grow, awaken, be self-aware, where all of those parts of ourselves get quieter and quieter, right? And that's where waking up and growing up can come together and support each other. Rebecca, love to hear from you.
Hi. So, I grew up as a Jehovah's Witness, and they're coming to terms now with some behavior that's having to be addressed. When you look at the larger spiritual religious organizations in general, there's a number of them that are having to come to terms with reality. So when we're talking about what Carol was talking about legally, we see that happening, say, with the Catholic Church, and now it's happening, say, with Jehovah's Witnesses and things like that. But there's a number of things coming up, even within Buddhist organizations, that are going to be, saying that, like, a lot of behavior has been happening that outside of the context of a spiritual or religious community would otherwise be considered criminal. And I think that's something really, when we were talking about in our group about how this particular one of those ethics things was written, when you talk about like the free labor and things like that, that's something I feel like that may be separate from the idea of sexual ethics, because how do you differentiate, the labor that you're putting in, if it's just, you're being of service, with a different idea of actually causing, irreparable harm.
Mm-hmm. Rebecca, thank you so much for bringing that in and pointing out part of our ethics and our principles we're talking about too is also talking about just right use of power and misuse of power in terms of getting labor, work, how to do that consciously and openly. There are some best practices out there for spiritual communities in terms of work trades, using modernity as a tool by qualifying hours, right? By using the legal system, by using contracts, including in our traditions, a modern approach as a tool to help with reciprocal agreements. It's a big topic. Is it Ashi? Oh, you're muted, my dear.
Yeah, hello. I'm speaking French, so I hope you will understand my French accent and my English, so bear with me. I have a concern, and I would like just to expose it. It's a question or whatever, I'd like to share. Like this point of like the humanity as the spiritual teacher. I think like what I see around me, what I see around me where I'm kind of, what is this, So when the person is addressed as, it's only a person. So this person can be whatever it is. Nothing to do with that person. The master is awake. She has a lot of flaws. She doesn't hide to, or the person doesn't need to hide her humanity, in the case I'm seeing around, the humanity is not rejected, like we even say, I'm not a saint. But there is not at all any interest to, or on the teaching which is shared, to invite the student or the people around in the Sangha to really have a look on their issue, to grow up. And in me, I'm saying, okay, of course, this person, it's not who we are, but it's at the same time here, everything is here. So I'm kind of, I don't know if I'm clear. I'm wondering how to address that when I hear that inside of me. It's making like something. But I want to expose it because maybe I didn't get something. I'm very much resonating with this integrity and this honesty that the association is proposing. So I'm very honored to be part of it. But it's like the denial of, you have nothing to do with fixing your personality. You don't touch it. You stay quiet. You come back here, you stay here. And yeah, so it brings some behavior of attitude towards this person, I don't like her. So it's affecting the behavior of the teacher towards a member in the Sangha. And it's, I don't know where, so I'm just, we really appreciate something.
It doesn't always have to come back to me too. There are others, here. I think of when I hear you speaking, I'm reminded of spiritual bypassing. Do you know that term? Okay. And my spiritual bypassing radar goes off. I don't feel like I understand exactly the context of the situation, but my spiritual bypassing radar goes off that's happening definitely in some form or another with this situation that you're talking about. I don't know. For me, spiritual bypassing is an occupational hazard in the spiritual teacher and spiritual communities. And so it's an
occupational what?
Hazard. It's an occupational hazard, meaning it's going to happen. So okay. It's like something Jack said to me earlier. It's not almost that it happens, it's what you do from there. Is there a process for you to express yourself or to talk about the process of what's happening, right? To give feedback to what's happening, not just someone's opinion, but what's actually happening. And is that there? That arises for me.
Yeah, that's where like some issue, around the teacher has been addressed, in satsang. And the answer is like, I'm not a saint. And that's over.
Right. That sounds like classic. I'm not diagnosing.
No,
But
but it's like, it's just that then it's not,
like spiritual
nothing
bypass.
in-
Yeah,
yeah,
that's
yeah.
a technique. Yeah, that is only a partial truth. So that would then the conversation would need to continue from there. Yeah, classic.
And I'd
Do
like
you
to
think- Yeah, go.
I suppose there's a few things that come to mind there. You know, follow your own gut. If something feels off, keep pursuing it, and trust your own wisdom there. It's interesting because, like, a teacher gets a parking fine, but they'll pay that even though that's in the illusion. But yet, when there is some humanness that is not in alignment for the students, that then becomes the students' fault for misinterpreting it, or it's brushed aside. So, like, all the laws of humanness apply to us, all of them. From, like, yes, we all need protein and carbohydrates and vitamins every day. We don't bypass that. Same as we don't bypass being respectful and honoring every student. You know, our humanness is there. So if a student is, or if a teacher is saying, well, I'm not a saint, to me, it reeks of immaturity. For a teacher to be able to be vulnerable, to be able to be open and own their own shadow in a mature way, that's what there's not a lot of. It's important for us to model that, because if a teacher says, I'm not a saint, and that's the end of the conversation, I would like to know, why don't they have skills around sharing their vulnerability in a boundaried, clear way?
Yeah.
Why, like, are they not self-aware? Where is the lack of awareness or the lack of ownership? Because both of those things would be being displayed there, in my mind.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm coming from a background, I mean, before I was mainly more, I come from a background as a therapist, and I'm quite happy actually. I'm quite happy to have this tool to be able to see where's the dynamic of the people I'm working with, you know? And when I see that from a spiritual teacher with the non-dual, you know, the non-dual, that you're not this, you're not that, it's like, yeah, but still, you know? And there is, yeah, so I'm repeating, thank you, it's supporting. Like me, it's more like as a friend, you know, that I'm trying to reach, because I'm not, she's not my master, or, you know, I'm not at that place, but as a friend, and I try to address, and the answer then, because just to say, what do you think of that, you know, because I see like mainly like a lot of judgment from the people in the Sangha, and there is a lot of fear. I feel like there is a lot of fear, as if everybody seems to be, if I say that, maybe I will be put out of, you know, so kind of, what do you think of that? Because for me, the first thing that goes out at one point is judging, you know, judging the other, judging you is something is like coming back from here, you know, first. And she's saying, yeah, we are not here to make therapy. And it's like, that's how the people are, and no problem with that. We don't touch that. And for me, I feel like, yeah, that creates a lot of fear actually, you know, because I'm speaking with the people in the group, and yeah, I didn't dare to speak it up in the satsang because maybe, you know, I don't know which kind of, and maybe some people have been thrown out. And yeah, I mean, it's not of my business in a way, but I'm taking it for, you know, in the heart to say, because people are so vulnerable in that space, you know, and we are there just to. So satsang is like the place where you can just open your heart and just be nothing. But then people are protecting. So it's kind of creating a contradiction. And so if I'm seeing that, it's probably useful for me or whatever, you know, like how to prevent this with the people I'm working with, at least, you know, for me. I'm very, very trying to be sensitive to that point, you know, so that everybody can have the space of, yeah, so it's difficult to address, like when you say follow your gut. I'm this kind of person, to pursue or not pursue it in satsang because I'm not there. But and if there is nobody there, I mean, what else can I do? Just serving and say.
Thank you. Are there other ideas related to that, or
Yeah, it's okay.
other questions?
Yeah, if somebody.
Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing that. One avenue also might be, especially in modernity, is there's a legal argument for those who need things quantified in organizations to establish right use of power, guidelines, and principles. So sometimes that's an end to the conversation, is legal protection of the organization, ironically, to start to have the conversations about generating feedback systems and feedback loops and bringing kind of, again, modern tools of psychology, modern tools of compassionate communication, feedback and repair into the conversation. Any other reflections from the breakout groups before we move into a little bit of best practice sharing? This is also rich. All these different voices coming through. Phil, I think I saw your hand for a nanosecond.
You did, and then you mentioned best practice, so I was going to withdraw my question, which is about that. One of the things you said in your opening was the acknowledgement that we're human and stuff's going to happen, and people are going to be attracted to one another, and students will be attracted to teachers, and teachers will be attracted to students, and people can fall in love. And we have to acknowledge that that's the case, and that historically, sometimes there's a happy ever after ending to such attractions. And I'm curious, given the current framework and our priorities, what people have learned, that how we can advise if necessary, or what we can keep in mind about the proper way to handle such things. I interviewed a couple recently on my podcast. I guess I shouldn't name them, but they met when he was a teacher and she was his student. And they've been married for years now. They work together, they teach together. So I asked them how they handled it when it was, when the attraction arose. And it's an interesting case study, but I'm curious to hear about what people think should be done and what kind of guidelines there should be in institutional settings, or in the ethical life of individual teachers.
Thank you, Phil. Perfect. Handover. I'll present one kind of best practices from the trenches over here, and then we'll open it up to other ideas and alterations from there. And Jerry, we'll come back to questions and open space again after this. So this is a house rules policy, mostly coming from Spirit Rock. I first looked at these and adopted them for my own institute and organizations from Spirit Rock 15 years ago. They're a good example of sort of a launching pad that integrates a lot of the wisdom that you all have been bringing in. This is specifically for spiritual communities. As we know, proper spiritual conduct is something that you find in the principles of the great traditions, from the 10 Commandments to the 10 precepts of Buddhism. So foundation is to a foundation recommendation for an individual following ethics or an organization is to first include, which the integral side of me loves, any traditional rules you have in your own lineage regarding sexual behavior. It might be anything from wearing a burqa to anything goes, right? I mean, there's lots of traditions of not wearing perfume or scents in some traditions, you know, there's very concrete things to other principles. A principle that kind of includes many of them is the principle of whatever your sexual commitment is to your partner, to your community, keep it. You know, keep it is always sort of number one. Don't break it, right? Be clear what it is and then keep it. So this is again Spirit Rock, and this is a best practice, that a sexual relationship is never appropriate between student and teacher. Period. Full stop. Right? A sexual relationship is never appropriate between students and teachers, number one. Right? Number two, during retreats or formal teachings, any intimation, like, you know, winking, flirting, you know, overt intimation that a future relationship may be possible or may happen is inappropriate, is not okay, right? So that's pretty clear, right? So your student, don't go there. Number three, real love happens, right? And as we are divine, we are human. It's, you know, we're talking about the sexuality and shadow. We're talking about like the deepest, most powerful, fundamental nature of that is the power we use to rebirth a human, you know, to create humanity. You know, it is a mystery at the same time. And sometimes genuine committed relationships occur where when somebody is in the role of the teacher and somebody is in the role of student. And so to acknowledge that, and that's the acknowledging that the teacher is also a person, right? Who's driven by these complexities and beauties of being human. So when that happens, what do? Well, number one, they got to stop being your student, right? So when that happens and it's genuine, there needs to be a break, like a formal, overt, understood on all sides, spoken about, not just mental reading, okay? You know, clear break that this person is no longer my student, they are no longer my teacher. And there's a time period set before they can get together, right? Spirit Rock had it at 3 months. My nonprofit I used to have had it at 2 years. You can try and put some boundary around it and it's a good thing, you know? I would add number 4, maybe this is at the beginning actually, that we talked about this before. The teacher should definitely be getting feedback, be getting therapy, be getting, you know, multiple perspectives and checks and understandings from those they trust, right? So that there's a shadow check, because sexuality and shadow and love, it's all tied in. There are a lot of earlier parts that, you know, come up. But when that happens, it's okay. It's actually okay, because it is going to happen, you know, between people. The other thing we would add, Jack mentioned this, you know, one red flag is a teacher then can't use this, you know, do this. If there's a pattern here, then that's something that you want to look at. You know, we always need to, as we establish these principles, we always need to understand there's nuance and learning. And these are an evolving document that needs to be re-examined and updated as we continue to learn about this. Yes. Okay. Thoughts, reflections on best practices. Do the shadow work, basically.
And I suppose, sorry, yeah, I like that you say real love happens, because there are exceptions. And I wonder if we, as, you know, the greater community of spiritual leaders, are mature enough to know the difference between real love that has to be navigated respectfully. You change the relationship so that there's no power differential, the relationship of teacher-student. You let some time pass. There is good practice there to navigate an inevitability of being with somebody in a sexual relationship when it starts off with a student-teacher dynamic. there is a good practice to navigate it successfully. Many have done it. I know, Rick, we've talked about this before, where you've come across people who've married their teacher, their student. However, the pattern that I was speaking to Kimberly about is like, if a teacher doesn't have some place for their shadow, doesn't have some place for their checks and balances, doesn't have any external support for themselves, of course, toxicity is going to come out. It's going to go somewhere if it's not being managed. And so, you know, a teacher that goes to the students and treats that as a dating pool repeatedly, it's a very different thing to the inevitability of meeting your future, you know, life partner. And I'm not sure that maturity is there for spiritual leaders to know the difference.
Well, Jack, can I intervene? Can I say something?
Please.
Even if the maturity and the wisdom is there, you don't necessarily know it right at the beginning. We've all been through this. You're attracted to somebody, you have a feeling about somebody, you don't know where it's going to lead, you don't know if you're just turned on or if this is your lifelong soulmate. There's a period of sort of liminal period when these things happen. We've all been there. Well, what do you do about that? I know somebody who, well, I don't want to say too much, it'll give the person away, got into a lot of trouble trying to handle such an attraction in a dignified and appropriate way. And the mere mention of it caused a lot of difficulties for him. So what does one do?
Did that person have somebody to process with them?
I don't know. It happened a couple of years ago. So
yeah, I think that's a game changer. You know, if you have somebody that can tease it through, because when you're in the chemistry of infatuation and you're not sure what it is, if you don't have somebody mature to walk you through it, to find out a deeper awareness of your own personality and what's going on for you, you haven't a hope of navigating it successfully. We can't do this alone. We can't. So there's an emotional maturity, a personality maturity that needs support. And I think that's part of it, for us to realize, okay, I don't know what to do here. And to not see that as something to be shameful about, but actually to celebrate that like, okay, actually I need to be responsible about my own blind spots here, because I don't know how to navigate this and I want to do it right. And if we could bring that gem of honesty into spiritual leadership, I think the pathway would be shared rather than an individual trying to navigate when you can't see the wood for the trees.
For me, in my own experience too, and that timeline really helps. That hard stop of it's not okay ever, you know, to date somebody you're in that hierarchical relationship with, to be with them no matter what. If it's that serious, if it's, you know, you add these layers of stop, you know, end the relationship and have a time period, those at least bring us to the right questions to hopefully lead to ethical behavior. Connie, not to out you, but I see you popped on the screen here and I'm wondering, I mean, yes, I am going to out you if you just invite you, or if you have anything you'd like to share here.
What's on your mind, Kimberly?
I'm wondering what's on your mind. Like, what is anything arising for you that you feel is coming through for addressing in relation to spiritual teachers, shadow, sex, all that? Policy.
So it's so funny. I just wrote down your name to make a note to email you, because we're so deeply aligned and passionate about this material, you know. I love seeing Phil and Rick. You know, I really enjoyed meeting with Richard and Chris-Anne. It was a lovely conversation. And I'm so happy that the word shadow is a part of the dialogue now. It seems to be flowing off of people's tongues. So the question that comes up for me is, what is the connection between the shadow or the unconscious material in the student or the teacher and the moral precepts? because every tradition, exoteric and esoteric, has moral precepts. People don't follow them. They're just they're like their paper. So how do we build those bridges? How do we actually help people cultivate shadow awareness? Jack just called it blind spots, and moral development. I mean, there's a huge field in psychology of moral development, but it's not included in our spiritual training ever, as far as I know. Well, you can get the 10 Commandments, but to me, that's kind of like, we outlawed racism, and look at what we see happening in our culture. So we can't legislate away the shadow. I mean, all of human history shows us that. So how do we build this bridge between our written moral codes, our stated, even our taught moral codes, and our inner worlds? How do we cultivate conscience? How do we cultivate empathy in people who are narcissistic or even sociopathic? I mean, when I wrote this last book, I became convinced some of these teachers are sociopaths. There's just no other explanation for what's happening, what they're doing. There's no other explanation. So that's kind of the question that I'm sitting with here, that link between our lived reality and what's on paper. And, in Tibetan Buddhism, there's this teaching of Samaya, which is the dedication to the teacher you make a vow never to criticize the teacher, never to express doubt. How do we get around these teachings when we now know psychology in the 21st century? Postmodern, you would say, Kimberly. How do we get around these pre-modern teachings? I don't know. It's really complex. It's not black and white. There's a lot of nuance in our conversation that we need to keep bringing in, and not some kind of default to right and wrong. I think that's really important.
Oh, thank you, Connie. Aho, let's just all let that sink in. One tool that helps we've seen, it's actually good research in the human development field that helps us move consciousness, it seems, in this great mystery, to get to the conversation of shadow actually being an object one can see in one's awareness, which is very mature, is the field of developmental psychology. And at our next webinar on October 16th, Dr. Terry O'Fallon is going to come on and address this very question that Connie's setting us up for, of there's actual moral development, like the work of Carol Gilligan and others. There's ethical development, and there's consciousness development. And one thing I play with in my field of developmental Vajrayana is including pre-modern, as well as postmodern, as well as post or meta-modernist. How can we somehow include smart guru yoga? How about that? Now that's controversial, right? Throw out the nonsense, but somehow hold on to the essence of our traditions and our lineage, our human lineage, this ancient human lineage, but lose the stink, air in the greenhouse. How do we do, we have to discover. Everybody, every teacher, here's my stake in the ground. Every teacher should have a shadow practice of some sort. And if you don't know what that means, go find out. Get Connie's book. Connie, could you put your book in the chat box? And I think there was another great author in the room.
Well, Phil will laugh at me if I do that.
Oh,
I was about to say, oh, she wouldn't want to do that.
well, yes, please. Yes, please. So we have about 8 more minutes.
I'll do it for you, Con.
I want to be aware of time. Jerry, can you give us a short share?
Yeah, I want to respond directly to Connie's question. Obviously, it's a big project, but we have to start with what we have. And what we have is these traditions and these scriptures. And we're not going to succeed just going head to head and saying, no, they're wrong. One of the things that I've been focusing on is trying, because all truth is contained in those sources if you look for it. You know, form is emptiness and emptiness is form. You know, you can read the Heart Sutra and probably find some of the answers to this. I found it in Shankara. I found it in the doctrine of Lesha Avidya, the remains of ignorance that persist after enlightenment. So with those, we have access to the people who are dedicated and devoted to those traditions. So we have that we can work with. And just generally, there's this huge conversation going on, and it's getting traction. You know, Connie commented how heartening it is to see that talk about the shadow is now pervading these conversations. It's beautiful. So we just have to keep going. We are succeeding. It will take time, but we will prevail.
Aho Soha, you preach it. Great to have a non-dualist in the house, bringing us there. Thank you. Catherine, love to hear from you.
I just wanted to conclude with, I feel the same way. I really am aligning with the organization, and I come from a very religious background, brought up very Roman Catholic, and you would never think I'd ever return back to that religion. And yet I see a resurgence because the fact they've been outed. They have been, in a lot of other religions and what we're doing here, they haven't yet been, but the Catholic religion, they have been outed. Sorry about that phone. It will stop in 2 more rings. But the two people that brought me back was Thomas Keating. I know some of you know who that is, Father Thomas Keating, and Thomas Merton, two well-known priests. And they both have been very clear about this. Thomas Keating stated that no priest should ever have been a priest before 40 years old. So he knew the growing up part was really missing, and that you would embrace all of the nuances about divine love and sexual love and, problems with daddy images and all of that stuff. He knew that was a part of growing up. And that Thomas Merton really was quite the little tear himself. I mean, the first couple of years in university, all he did was drink and hang out, would love to womanize. And, so these both practically saintly entities that we have are people that understand that there's no way of denying the fact that these parts of us exist, and to embrace them and actually make them the gold and have them be the actual material that we need in order to truly grow up and allow people to share authentically and vulnerably about what that means. Thank you.
Another aho. So hot, Catherine. So beautiful. What if, we had healthy sexuality in our years of intense sexual hormones and, of our youth and our young adult? What are the what ifs of these things? Yes, Phil, please.
Well, 2 thoughts. One, I think it would be really helpful down the road if we had some younger voices in this mix. My breakout group was 3 old men, and it would be very useful, I think. The other thing is, I'm very encouraged by the kind of conversation we've had and the examples of best practices and suggestions. I think there's great hope that misdeeds can be prevented through various means. And at the same time, I have to, maybe this isn't cynical, I think this is just realistic. We also, the need for accountability and enforcement is always going to be there. There's always going to be people who misbehave. There's always going to be ambiguous situations. And so those kinds of mechanisms, I wouldn't want us to, or anybody to turn their away from those mechanisms in the idealistic hope that problems can all be prevented. They won't be. We have to have both going on.
Yay. Got a couple minutes. Anita, did you want to pipe in? I know it's at the end here, but
I guess I just have too much to say about the topic, so I'm afraid of taking up too much time. But this was my first webinar. I actually joined the Harvard conference with the Harvard Divinity School a couple months ago, and I've really been just digesting a lot of that and realizing how fortunate I was to have this path that I wrote about in my book, to be able to help myself out of the situation I was in with the long-term guru-student relationship, and how important it is to share that, because I realized just how fortunate I was and how not everyone is that fortunate. And a lot of gurus also do corrupt the teachings themselves, which blocks the path then to be able to apply the teachings as the way to overcome the darkness. And that's really like the worst darkness possible. And there's so few people talking about it that I feel it's so important to have these kind of discussions. And I feel just so grateful that at least with the abuse that I did go through, at least I got the pure teachings, because it was surrendering to the teachings themselves, especially the Brahmacharya teachings, and a correct understanding of what Brahmacharya is in terms of the right usage of sexual energy and how that can be channeled into creativity, and how that can be a tool for discernment also in terms of selection of a sexual partner, was all just so important. And I feel like it is really important to share, and I'm just happy to learn and listen right now so that I can kind of know how to do that and how to be guided in that process, because I just feel so grateful for everything that I have experienced. I feel like I've had really incredible gurus who have really been great examples, and I can appreciate them because I had some really dark characters along the way as well. And it's that contrast, I think, of duality that gives you the appreciation for the good even more. So yeah, there's just so much here, but I'm so grateful to be a part of this community and to be invited to share. So thank you.
If you have a chance, could you just put the name of your book in the chat?
it's in the chat box.
I did. Yeah. Thank you so much. It's up. If you go a little bit further, it's The Way of the Goddess.
And that is so grateful for you sharing your story. So everybody check out that book. I'll be doing that. And please come back. Isn't it true, everybody, that our greatest teachers are often the ones that show us how not to do it, right? How not to do it sometimes. Well, we are at time, and just so grateful too for all of you coming and being present with us in this rich conversation. Join us next time at the ASI is the next one, October 16th. That's our next one. And we will be there. And all of these presentations all seem to be sort of flowing and building on each other in such a beautiful way, which as I zoom out, I see that process. I feel community. I feel that continuation of community. So deep pranams and thank you to everybody. And we'll see you next time.